Hey, welcome Tom and Michelle.
Good morning, everybody.
And we got Andrew, we got Cliff. Excellent. Michelle, love the polar bear thing. We're getting ready to start in about 3 minutes, people. Thank you for being early. Anybody feel like sharing your camera so we get to see you? It's always nicer that way. Hey, Cliff. Good to see you. Thank you. Cliff, where are you calling in from today?
Southern California.
Ooh, nice. You're up nice and early.
8 o'clock's a fine starting time.
Yep. Well, if you're in any kind of consultative business, you get used to working early on the coast. You have to.
Absolutely. Used to wake up at 4 in the morning every day.
Were you in finance or how come?
No, just a good way to get ahead of everybody and kind of set the agenda for the day.
Right. So what do you do now?
And Charlie, where are you?
I am at the moment in Florida. I used to split time between New Jersey and Florida, and now I've gravitated to the southern climb. So I'm in Florida full time now.
Got it. You thought you were escaping COVID, and now look what you found.
You got that right. Yes, sir. The headlines are quite something down here. We got about a minute and a half to go. Whoops. Andrea, would you like to reveal yourself, your live self? Come on camera for a second. Hey, Tom, thank you.
Sadly, I would not. I chatted, I'm not camera ready. So you're going to see my airbrushed picture instead. It's
all right. It's a wonderful picture. Yeah. Tom, thank you for videoing.
I'm absolutely here.
Good. We hear that. Excellent. All right. The board is starting to fill up. Jason, you want to take over the emceeing?
It's just approaching the top of the hour. Welcome, everybody, to the Trust Matters webinar. This is a series we've been hosting for a little over 2 years now. Our webinar today is hosted by Charles H. Green. He's the founder of Trusted Advisor Associates and author of the Trusted Advisor book, among other books. Today's webinar topic is Why Sell is Not a Four-Letter Word, and it's a partnership with the Get Real Project. We have Andrea on, who's the founder of the Get Real Project as well. So welcome. We can move on to the next slide. So you wrote, this is Trust Matters webinar number 13. As I said, we've been doing this for quite a while now. You can find other webinars at trustedadvisor.com/webinars. On the bottom, there's links to the archive and our next webinar that's coming up in September. And you will receive links to the recorded presentation resources for this webinar. We will use the Q&A feature most of us are pretty familiar with Zoom in the days of COVID. So there's a little chat button on the bottom, and we're going to actually have some polls that pop up throughout the webinar to get your feedback on some other items. And as I mentioned, we do have another webinar coming up in September, and the topic is, I'm a little unprepared on this. Hold on a second. I will pull it up. It is, sorry. So it is September 22nd. The topic is 5 simple steps to create trust in a conversation, and it's hosted by Noel Mikolenko, who's the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates. And on to the next slide.
I'll do this one.
Yeah, you go for it, Charlie.
This is Charlie Green. There's the 3 book. This is the advertisement page, right? The Trusted Advisor was written about 20 years ago. We have a 20th anniversary edition coming out next year, actually. Trust-Based Selling, which we'll touch on a lot today. And I co-authored with Andrea Howe, who's also on this call, the Trusted Advisor Field Book. www.trustedadvisor.com, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you everybody for coming. We got an intimate crowd today. And just to give you a feel for here, the word sell or sales, I mean sell, really is in many ways a 4-letter word in both senses of that meaning. And in other ways it isn't. And what I want to do today, just to give you a heads up, is kind of explore that inner tension that I suspect most of us feel, this love-hate relationship with the word sell and the idea of selling, and how to resolve it. And guess what? It has a lot to do with trust. So I want to open up with a little bit about trust, get some fundamentals out of the way, and then jump into what does that really mean for selling, and how especially do we resolve that inner contradiction. Then I'll give a few examples, a few specifics, and I'll end up with sort of one big practical thing, in my opinion, that we can all do to make things better. So let's jump in. Whoops. First, let's do a polling question, and I hope this is kind of rhetorical, but if a buyer trusts you, they are more likely to buy from you. What do you think about that statement? Click on the polling question there. All right. Totally not surprising so far. All right, Jason, we got pretty much everybody. Let's go ahead and show the results here. Whoop, not that one. Jason, back up. There we go.
Did it jump? Yeah, there you go.
There we go. So 91% of you strongly agree. 9% of you mildly agree. Totally unsurprising. I would have been a little shocked if any of us had said otherwise. But it's important to notice that there's very strong agreement. Just plain old common sense. We agree with the notion that trust helps sales. Okay, so I'm going to build off of that. And let's first a few key concepts about trusts and how that works. You might think it's useful thinking about trust to start off by defining it, like go into the dictionary. In fact, it's really not terribly useful. I like to say I trust my dog with my life, but not with my sandwich. And that may not be a funny joke, but technically it is a joke, and it rests on our ability to sort of hold two semi-contradictory notions of a word in mind at the same time. And it's the tension between those two that makes it a joke. Well, why is that relevant? Here's a good example. 90%, 80%, 70%, a bunch of the stuff that you read in the business press looks something like this. Trust in banking is down, or trust somewhere is up or it's down in this sector and that sector. And we look at the survey precision of that kind of data and we say, oh my gosh, wow. But let me tell you, those kinds of statements beg a very important question. Does that mean A, that banks are less trustworthy? Or completely different, does that mean that people distrust banks? Because anytime you talk about data about trust, you're looking at an end result. And if that's all you're seeing, you can't tell what the problem is. Like if we're talking in the last 5 years about Wells Fargo, I think many of us would agree that's a problem of trustworthiness. They messed up. They're still struggling through that. On the other hand, another parallel, if you look at the long-term trend of crime statistics in the United States, violent crime is statistically provably down over the last 20 years. At the same time, equally statistically provable, fear of violent crime is actually up. So there's a case where the perception is an issue compared to the Wells Fargo banking case where it's the underlying facts on the ground. And unless we can describe the difference between those two fundamental causes, all that data is not very useful.
Hey,
so,
Charlie, I'm going to pause you for 1 second. Can
yes.
you pull your microphone a little bit away from your mouth? You're just picking up a little.
Thank you.
Bumps in.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So basically, what trust problem are we trying to solve? Is it a problem of trusting or a problem of being trustworthy? Because it's the two of those that create trust. Now, focusing just on the trustworthiness side, we have a notion called the trust equation. We first wrote about it in the book, The Trusted Advisor, a long time ago. Very simply, it suggests that we can think of trustworthiness as a combination of 4 factors. Credibility, like expertise and, can I believe what you tell me? Reliability, which has to do with track records and dependable. Do you keep your promises? Do you have a track record? Intimacy, which is a word that describes sort of security and safety. How comfortable do I feel sharing certain kinds of information with you? All 3 of those are positive attributes, so if we possess them, then our trustworthiness goes up. In the denominator, the factor goes the other way, self-orientation, which basically means how focused am I on myself versus on the person I'm talking with. If I'm either selfish or just neurotically self-obsessed, I don't have, psychic bandwidth to be able to pay attention to you, and that would lower my trustworthiness. So it's just a conceptual model. However, it occurred to me some years ago that actually might make for an interesting self-assessment tool. And we developed it, and over 100,000 people have taken it at this point. You could take it yourself if you haven't already at trustedadvisor.com/TQ. It consists of 20 questions. It only takes about 5 minutes or less. You get instant results. I recommend it to you. You'll learn a lot more about your own patterns of trustworthiness. Some of the output looks like this. You get your TQ score, but much more importantly, you get sort of ratings on which components you're strongest at and which you're weakest at. The data, I want to share some of the data with you from that 70,000 people. We took a snapshot at that level. It's far beyond that now. But it's not a random sample. These are 70,000 people that found their way to the website trustedadvisor.com. They're mostly professional services people because that's who we largely work with. It was about 70% North America, and gender distribution was actually fairly even. So I want to use a little bit of that data to finish teeing up the trust issues here before we jump into selling. So let me ask you 3 questions, just gut feel, do not overthink this. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Jason's going to put them up in a second. Number 1, what happens with trustworthiness as we get older? Number 2, who do you think scores more highly on trustworthiness, men or women? And number 3, which of those 4 trust components do you think turns out to be the strongest? So you got 3 questions on this poll here. Have at it. Hey, we're starting to see results coming in. All right. I can see the results as they're coming in, and so far they are not surprising to me.
Give everybody another 30 seconds.
Yep, we got 3/4 of you.
All right. Not seeing movement.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so here's what you said as a group. With respect to age, 62% of you, a clear majority, said, yeah, we probably get more trustworthy with age. And I'm going to give you the answers in a minute. Let's just see what you thought. Very interesting. 73% of you figure women probably score more highly on the trustworthiness quiz. And the other one, there's a clear winner with reliability, but there's quite a bit of spread among the people on this call today. Okay, I'll give you the actual results in a second, but I just wanted to make sure we know where we're all instinctively coming from. The reason for that is I do argue that we actually understand trust very well intuitively. We have trouble talking about it, but at a gut level, we kind of understand how it works. So we just did the polling questions. So here's the data. What happens to our scores as we age? I think it was 3/4 of you said our scores go up with age. You're absolutely correct. That was actually the strongest correlation in the data, that as we get older, we get more trustworthy. Some of you may think, wait a minute, that's a self-assessment. Maybe we're lying to ourselves. Hey, we could be. That's true. But I'd ask as a sort of proof of concept, each of you ask yourselves, am I today more or less trustworthy than when I was 19? And I think almost all of us would say, no contest. So yeah, you're on track with the data from the first one. Here's an interesting one. Most of you, what was it, 65% or something, Jason, I forget, said probably women.
75, I think.
75% said women. Guess what? You're right again. On a 100 scale, it's 83.3 versus 82.3, women versus men. If that doesn't sound like a lot, remember, this is 70,000 data points on a binary question. On, off, up, down, heads or tails, black, white, male, female. We did not offer, different gender definitions. It was a forced binary choice. And that's about 1.5 standard deviations of significance, which means, yeah. And by the way, even more persuasive to me, I've given this talk to maybe 300 groups over a number of years. Literally 296 out of 300, including this group today, said, yeah, probably women. And I remember the 4 exceptions vividly. One of them was a group of HR executives in Romania, which I have no idea how to explain. 2 of them were tech companies on the West Coast, which I find not surprising. They said, oh, there's no difference. And the other one was a small webinar just the other day from a professional services firm, where they just barely, 1 or 2 people, majority said, they're probably the same. Anyway, yes, women score more highly. Polling question. Now, what do you think is most responsible for that difference of women outscoring men? It turns out one of the 4 factors disproportionately counts for it. Which one do you think it is that women score most highly on that drives that female overage? Interesting, seeing the results coming in here. We've got 3/4 of you in. Let's get a few more. Okay, close enough. Well, 72% of you said intimacy. And guess what? You are right again. Here we go. It's mostly in that one variable, and that variable is intimacy. Men and women score about the same on credibility, reliability. Women are just as neurotic as men, but here, look at the gap there. And again, that kind of intuitively makes common sense to most of us. It just, yeah, that's probably right. Again, remarkable unanimity among all of us when we think about trust. We just have trouble talking about it and figuring out how to talk about it. Now, I'm going to jump out of our database and very quickly into some common surveys that are done by Pew Research, Yankelovich, Gallup polls, and so forth about least and most trusted professions. And if I ask you, I forget, do we have a polling question on this? I don't think we do.
We do not.
I'll tell you what, if everybody has chat, just punch in, who do you think is at the bottom? Who are the least trusted professions? Just chat in, put your guess there in chat. Bottom of the list, least trusted professions. Who do you think shows up? We got politicians, we got lawyers, I am one, we got car salesmen. Well, guess what, folks? Lawyers.
Energy brokers too. That's a new one.
Yeah. Those graphics are preloaded, the ones I just put up there, because I know from having done this, everybody with great unanimity, they're going to come up with those 3: lawyers, politicians, used car salesmen, right? Again, there's unanimity about how we instinctively think about trust. Now, contrary to what I just said, however, people don't have as much unanimity about the most trusted profession. Who do you think shows up at the top of that one? Let's see your chat nominations on that one. Most trusted profession. We got doctors, we got teachers, ministers. They used to be high, I don't know. Judges, counselors, medicine, broadly. Well, this is the only question I find that people are a little bit surprised by. But when I click on the graphic, you're probably going to go, oh, yeah. So here we go. Click. It's nursing. Remarkable unanimity over time periods that nurses, they outrank doctors. In the United States, for example, 19 out of the last 20 years, nursing was the top of these lists. The one exception was in 2002 when firemen made it top of the list. Anybody remember why? That was the year after 9/11. Well, by 2003, it was back to nurses, and it's been nurses ever since. Now, ask yourself if you had to choose one. And by the way, nursing in the United States is an 89% female profession. Remember what we just talked about women, intimacy, trust scores, etc. But whether you're talking male nurses or female nurses, I've talked to them both. I would argue that the one critical trust component to be successful as a nurse, male or female, is probably intimacy. That whole bedside manner thing, ease and comfort. And, you know, look at what we've looked at on TV for the past 4 months. The amazing role of, you know, nurses being the ones between our loved ones and people who are dying. And they are there to make that most intimate connection of all. It's really, really quite staggering. So it shouldn't be a surprise then that when you run a regression analysis on the data that we have, it turns out that the strongest driver of trustworthiness is intimacy. I mean, add up the observations. Most trusted profession nursing, women outscore men. They do it mainly on intimacy. Everybody on a gut feel agrees with this. Now, when we share this data with a lot of our clients who are lawyers, consultants, accountants, tax people, etc., this is not what they want to hear. You know, it's not what they're great at. It's not why they got hired. It's not what they focus on, but it's the truth. That seems to be a critical thing about intimacy and trustworthiness. Now, let's take all that and say, what's that got to do with sales? Let's flip the switch here. I'm going to argue it has a lot to do with sales in the following kinds of way. First of all, this is a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer this, but think about it. When you were like 19 or 20, 21, 22, what did you want to be when you grew up? And my guess is not many people on this call said, I know, I want to be a salesman. Now, some of you are, because this is about sales and so forth, and you know, God bless you. But even those folks on this call who really have chosen positively to get into sales, I think you would admit that there is this residual used car salesman hangover mentality that's actually pretty deep, even in an unconscious level in all of us. We don't like the S word, and we prefer something much more passive and elegant and multisyllabic like business development. Notice it's not even the active voice. We don't say develop business. It's business development like it happens. It really is a four-letter word in deep ways. And let me go this time to the dictionary. I'm going to read this out loud to you rather quickly. But notice what happens to the definition the further down the list we go. To give up or make over to another for a consideration. Okay, fine. Dispose of, to, or offer purchase for a price. To deal in, keep, or offer for sale. To make a sale or offer for sale to persuade or induce someone to buy something, to cause to be accepted or accept a price for something not a proper object for such action, to force or exact a price, to cheat, betray, hoax, to be employed to induce others to buy as a salesman, a clerk in a store, cheat, hoax, sell up, sell down the river, a horrific connotation, sell out, hard sell, soft sell. Now notice, the further down the list you go, the worse it sounds, right? And if this is a good dictionary, and I'm sure it is, the job of a dictionary is to describe accurately how people use a word. And the further down the list you go, the more subliminal those definitions are. So I would argue, even if you're a very positive, proactive salesperson, you're carrying around with you some of this subconscious negative meaning about sales. And we don't like that, right? We want to stand for other stuff, professionalism, integrity, ethics, value. I think most of us on the call would agree, yeah, that's how we want to see ourselves, and therefore we have this internal tension. How to square the circle? You know, how can we integrate the need? I mean, I'm sure many of you on this call who are in professional services or consultative kinds of professions, you really do aspire to high-level goals, objectives, and so forth, and yet the nature of the business is the higher you get, the more you have to do that four-letter word, sell. So how do we square those two? Well, I have an answer for you, and it starts really at the objectives level. Like if you think about the goal of traditional selling, if you ask any salesperson, what's the goal of selling? You look into any sales training program or any sales book, and they will tell you, come on, that's obvious. The goal of traditional selling is to get the sale. Duh. Well, it turns out that's not the only way to think about it. The goal, I would argue, of what I call trust-based selling is not to get the sale. It is to help the client or the customer. Now, if that sounds like just mealy-mouthed words, let me break it down for you because it's not. It's a lot more than that. The answer in my mind is you have to alter the objective. The objective of trust-based selling is to help the buyer do the right thing for the buyer, period. So what are some implications of that? Well, let me ask you to do a thought experiment all together now. Imagine that you are a buyer of a complex purchase. You have to buy something that's complicated. And furthermore, it's expensive, whatever it is. I'll give you some examples in a second. And furthermore, it's really important to you that you get this right. And furthermore, let's assume this is one of these things where the seller knows a lot more than you do. To help you think of examples, maybe you're getting your parents into some assisted living situation. That's complex, that's expensive, it's important, and the sellers know way more than you do. Or maybe you need to change your HVAC system in your house and you're not an engineer. Or maybe you're buying a second home property, or maybe you're trying to assess a financial planner. You decide, but please picture in your own mind a situation where you're the buyer, because I'm now going to ask you a few questions. Let's think about the seller in that situation. You're the buyer. Now let's think about the seller. Imagine that in this situation, the seller you're dealing with is someone who seems to have your best interests at heart. You know, that's your gut feel. That they seek to understand your interests. They seem to be genuinely trying to figure out what your interests are. They offer advice along the way that's useful to you. It's not irrelevant. It really is on point for what you're talking about. They're not trying to get you to buy, or at least you don't get that feeling at all. They're driven by your calendar, not theirs. You get no sense that they're trying to close a sale by the end of the quarter, anything like that. They don't even seem to be wedded to this particular transaction. And finally, they're completely transparent and honest, every interaction you have with them. If all those are true, isn't it natural that that's the person you want to buy from? That's my rhetorical question. Isn't that exactly who you want to buy from? And I'm guessing, just like we did on that first poll question, if people trust you more, they're more likely to buy from you. You're likely saying, well, yeah, that is who we'd like to buy from. Well, let me do the obvious next slide here. If that's how we prefer to buy, maybe shouldn't that be how we try to sell? Shouldn't it work the other way around? Now again, let's think of some of the implications though of selling with the objective of helping the client rather than getting the sale. There's a paradox here, which is that if you actually detach from the win as your objective, get rid of that as your objective, and instead focus on the client, you will actually get more sales. That's the logical conclusion of what we said here today. We've agreed, if we trust you, we're more likely to buy from you. And I think we've agreed that those are the characteristics of somebody we'd like to buy from. So if we as sellers behave that way, like not focused on getting the sale, we're likely to get more sales. That's a paradox, right? Now, one of the biggest implications of that is this one. The best way to get short-term results turns out not to be what everybody does, which is pursuing short-term behaviors. It's actually through long-term behaviors. Because if somebody's focused on their short-term good as a seller, we can feel that. You get the sense that they're driving towards a transaction. Maybe they even say so. But if, on the other hand, we demonstrate in all our words and thoughts and actions that we are not focused on time, that is what actually sells. So this is one of the implications of the paradox. Best short-term results come from long-term behavior, not short-term behavior. Now let's get practical. You look at what happens in almost any sales funnel review. I don't care what organization you're with, what you call it. You have a periodic meeting, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, where you look at all the leads and think about what happens in those conversations. It's a short time frame focus, right? The action steps that you're talking about are all like now, tomorrow, next week. The milestones, pretty soon, next week, next month at the outside, 3 months maybe. And you have to ask yourself, who benefits, cui bono? For whose benefit is this? The answer transparently is that's for the seller, supposedly, that we're focused on all these short-term things. That is not long-term behavior. And guess what? Therefore, it doesn't work as well. In fact, we consistently behave in short-term manners. Let me give you a few more examples of this thing. We talked about the sales funnel review. How about in sales presentations? How about in engaging on content? I'm going to argue we tend to do this all short-term and we shouldn't. Digital prospecting, riddled with short-term behavior. Pricing, we tend to behave short-term. Marketing, we tend to behave short-term, and even proof of value tends to be polluted with a lot of short-term behavior. Let me just dive down a few of those. When you're talking about a first meeting, a sales presentation, an interaction, one of the biggest faults that we have is we continue to talk about our credentials. That's what got you in the door. It's not what's going to get you the sale. We need to start focusing on the client, on the customer, on their needs, and demonstrating that we actually have long-term interest in them. Instead, we all too often, in my experience, waste a lot of time in that meeting talking about our credentials, our credibility, which has already got you in the door. Giving presentations, death by 1,000 slides, pitching with trust. You really need to take 2 or 3 slides and dive into something about the client. You can't be long-term trust-based client focused without very quickly talking about the client's issues. A great way to do that is have a hypothesis, a point of view, a problem statement, something that gets you engaged so you can actively interact with the client for the sake of the client and their issues. A great way to do this, by the way, is what I call bringing a risky gift. Let's say you've got a first meeting with a potential client. Maybe it's by Zoom, maybe it's in person. It's very tempting to send out your latest and greatest white paper, your value proposition, your most favorite piece of research that's bulletproof. How can anybody argue with it? Well, the problem with bulletproof white papers is they're bulletproof. There's no argument about it. We all understand that. You wouldn't send somebody something that's arguable. But what if you did? What if you actually sent an early communication to a client that basically said, look, we haven't met you yet. We haven't dived deep into how you work and so on, but we do have some experience and we've taken some time to look into your situation. And you know what? It occurs to us that this issue, let's call it X, might really be a big problem for you. Now, we could be wrong about that, but is that true or not? Let us know. Now notice, that's risky. You could be wrong. That's the whole point of the thing. And you tell them we could be wrong. Well, there's only 2 possible answers to that, and they're both good. The first one is when the client says, yeah, that is a huge issue for us. Absolutely. Anything you got to talk about that, we'd love to hear. That's a good result, right? The second one is arguably even better. That's where they say, yeah, everybody thinks that's the problem, but no, it's actually this. In which case you say, oh my God, the minute you said that, I realized, of course you're right. Wow, tell me more about that. And you are into a good conversation. And the reason that it goes that well is because you took a risk, because that's how you kick off trust. Somebody has to take a risk. If all you do is wait for the client to take the first risk, it's like aggressively waiting for the phone to ring. We need to kickstart it by taking something risky. So there's a thought. There's a lot of worst practices around digital marketing, which are not client-focused at all. We live in a world where so much information is available, and 90% of what I see in digital marketing is focused on targeting, narrowing the possible universe for who might be a good lead. 0% of it, or close to 0 that I can see, uses all this wonderful information to actually personalize, and it's all sitting out there. I don't know about you, but I get 3 or 4 inquiries a day from LinkedIn, somebody saying, hey, we got this great thing and you might be interested and let us know if, and so forth. I have no idea how they targeted me, but let's assume that they did a great job, that somehow it's very relevant to me. What I do know, they took 0 time to personalize it whatsoever. And it's not that hard. Go look at somebody's LinkedIn profile. You know, comment on the weather in Minneapolis. Comment on the latest blog post. You know, the data is there for us, and yet we do not use it. We keep it impersonal, digital, and implicitly we're looking to just spray a lot of numbers out there with a small hit rate. If you want to create trust and therefore be more effective at selling, shift some of that effort into fewer leads and a little bit more effort on personalizing it. Who are you talking to? That's the way you get to trust. Another example, let's talk about pricing and how untrust-based most of our discussions around price are. You've all heard this one, and maybe they say it directly, maybe they say it politely. But at some point, I'm sure all of you have heard, well, you know, your price was just a little too high on this one. Or earlier in the conversation, gee, your price sounds a little high. How do we respond to that? Think about it. In my experience, most of us respond by saying, well, let me reinforce the value proposition here. It's not that high compared to that. or I'm not really sure you understand how these things are so expensive. You know, they tend to be a little defensive. Well, let's put a trust mindset onto that conversation. Next time somebody says to you, gee, that's kind of high, here's what you say. You say, kind of high? Well, help me understand what you mean by that, because in my experience, that could mean several things. I mean, sometimes people have said that's kind of high and they mean it's higher than they expected, right? So there's an expectations issue, and that's problematic. I hear you. Sometimes people say your price is high because it's over their budget. Well, that's problematic too. I get that. Other times when people say your price is too high, they really mean, hey, I got a quote for 30% less from somebody else. What's going on? And still other times when people say your price is too high, they really just, they're into bargaining. They're never going to take the first quote. They want to fight about it. So I don't know which of those you mean by that, and maybe you mean something else entirely. So help me understand what you mean when you're saying the price is too high, and let's talk about it. Maybe we can fix something, maybe we can't. I don't know, but let's find out. Help me understand what you mean. Now, you'd say it shorter than that, but basically the gist of that kind of reaction defuses the tension. It's no longer attack and respond. And it's also taking the client seriously. You know, price is too high. All right, let me understand what that might mean. And let's collaboratively join together on figuring out precisely the source of the issue and whether or not we could do something about it. And by the way, if your objective is to be focused on helping the client always, you have to accept the possibility that maybe we're not the right one for this. Maybe the price is too high for whatever reason. We have to be able to accept no sale as a possible range of outcomes. If we constantly keep fighting to get this sale, this transaction, by definition, you are operating short-term and focused on you, and not long-term and focused on the client. It doesn't work. The usual answer, and I said the trust-based answer, we went through that. Here's another perspective of some of the implications of this point of view. Many of you work for organizations where there's a very clear line between sales and marketing. And a lot of CRM systems really drive us towards efficiency. The discussions around them are aimed at qualifying leads, screening out people that are not going to be good leads so we can focus on those that are. But in fact, next time that happens, if somebody comes to you and you realize pretty quickly, we're not right for them, instead of just kissing them off, get on the phone with them. Take a 5-minute email, take a 10-minute email, and say to them, you know what, we're not right for you, not the right situation, but it's an interesting problem. I can see why you came to us. Here's a couple things you might think about. Here's somebody else you might go to, or here's another angle that maybe you haven't thought about. Okay, good luck on all that. Let me know if I can ever be of any help. If you have been screened out that way, it's memorable. You think, wow, those people, I wasn't even right for them, and yet they took a little bit of extra time to try and help me. Well, what's the value of that in terms of marketing? It's huge. Positive word of mouth. They're going to remember next time. If in fact you have something that's useful for them, they're going to tell a lot of people. And that comes about simply by looking at marketing in the longer term, thinking about the value of spending a little bit extra time. So unless you're retiring tomorrow, every self-oriented sales interaction is going to subtract from your reputation. But if you behave this way, long term, you will increase the odds of more sales. Maybe not this transaction right now, but definitely more transactions over time. Again, long-term behaviors result in better short-term results than do consecutive short-term behaviors. So let's take proof of value as a final one. You know, we're all good at coming up with return on investment, value propositions, economic proofs, and so forth. You know what? There's a million ways you can make complicated sales look good on paper. All of us are a little bit suspicious. The best way to prove your value is to jump in and use what used to be called sample selling. I won't tell the whole story, but I remember once a law firm telling me that they had, a client of law firms had invited 3 firms into bid. 2 of them did the usual thing. And the 3rd law firm said, you know what, let's take this first 1-hour meeting with you and let's do an experiment. Let's take the first 55 minutes, pretend that you've already hired us, and let's have the first meeting. And then with 5 minutes to go, we can stop and say, what does it feel like to work with us? because the only way to know what it's like to work with us is to work with us. What shall we do? Well, in that case, it only took half an hour of that experiment for the client to say, you know what, we love you guys. That is simple sample selling. There's nothing better for these complicated, important, expertise-based kinds of businesses to just dive in and work problems with people in real time. Give them a taste of your wares. I've touched on a few examples, a few specific things that derive from that general proposition that if you behave in long-term trustworthy ways, you will get more sales. Everybody always wants to know, what's the one thing I can do when I get out of here? Well, I'll give you the one thing. I think it boils down to more listening. And I know I'm far from the first person to tell you listening, but let me touch a little bit more on that. This has to do with soft skills that we saw early on are important for trust. It's the intimacy, the empathy, the curiosity, the respect dynamics that play into that. Listening also means low self-orientation, and it's clearly client or customer focused. Let me be clear the kind of listening that I'm talking about. It's not listening to prove or disprove a hypothesis. It's instead listening to sort of validate the person who's talking, to let them know that they matter enough in your mind to pay attention, to understand where they're coming from, so that after you have listened to them in a masterful way, they feel, wow, good, you do sort of understand where I'm coming from. Thank you. And at that point, they become far more willing to listen to you. They naturally reciprocate. That's what people do. That's what we all do as human beings in business as well as anywhere else. So if I had to one-line it, it's listen more. Jason, before we do resources here, let me just go back off of slides and let's ask if anybody wants to ask any questions or come online.
I don't see any questions popping up. If anybody has them, please answer them. Ask them in the chat. I actually have a question that we've worked together for quite a while, and something came up that in terms of focusing on long-term sales versus short-term goals, how do you address that when a lot of organizations are driven on the next the quarterly revenue, right? So that a lot of management doesn't want to hear that.
Right. Well, here's a nice thing. You don't necessarily have to tell management what you're doing. If you believe that behaving in long-term ways will improve short-term results, that's all they care about, right? So you don't have to get into some debate about it. Just do it. Just go off and behave in trustworthy ways as opposed to not trustworthy. The numbers will speak for themselves, and the numbers is what those managers tend to care about. Now, it's easier if they buy into what you're doing, I grant you, but it's actually not necessary. We as salespeople in a lot of these complex businesses, we have a lot of agency to change our own behaviors without asking permission, without doing anything different. And if your sales management questions it, say, give me a quarter, give me a few months. We'll see if the results come out. And I'm confident they will. Anybody else, feel free to come off mute and just add to the conversation here, say something, questions, whatever.
Green, can you just tell us a few more words about what's involved in listening? I might think I'm already a genius at that. And obviously you've given this a lot of thought and practice. Just a couple more sentences about what form that might take or what it might look like.
Good. Wonderful question. Thank you, Joel. Here's a couple thoughts. Wow is a full sentence. If you say it right, if you say it leaning in with your eyes wide open, making clear that you just paid attention to that person and that you're impressed or struck or whatever by what they said, wow by itself is a full sentence. That reflects a lot. It says, I was listening to you. And it made an impact on me. I was affected by what you had to say. If I had to pick, let's go with more best practices here. If I had to pick a little 3-word clip for the single best one, I think Andrea would agree with me. Noelle's on the line here too. It would be 3 words, tell me more. Now think about the subtext in those 3 words. And again, you probably say it leaning in, there's a certain tone in your voice that says you're serious. When you say tell me more, it's not like what are the top 3 X factors. You're not fixing the question in a certain framework. It's very open. The implication, the subtext is you've got all the time in the world. You're here to listen to them. The subtext, I think, is also you set the agenda. You decide what it is that you want to say to me, but tell me more. you can build on that. A lot of us sometimes worry, Joel, that maybe I'm doing too much. Maybe they want to hear something from me. There's a couple ways to handle that fear. One is to say, wow, this is great. Do you think I understand it yet, or should I be listening to you some more? Let the client into the conversation. If the client ever does say, enough with the questions, when are you going to talk? Then you can say, well, good. I was trying to figure out when the right time was. Sounds like the right time is now. Or you can say, you know what? Good question. I want to hear a couple more minutes from you. I promise you in 2 minutes, I'll have some substantive things to say, but I want to make sure that I understand where you're coming from. So Joel, there's a few thoughts. The purpose of all of it is to make sure that the other person feels heard. That's the goal. We've all probably heard that old saying, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. That is a sequential statement. That's a statement about sequential psychology. And I think it's pretty true. First, we want to know if you give a damn. And having satisfied that hurdle, we then become willing to listen to your expertise. But if we just spout off expertise before the other person thinks you even care, you know, that's spam. That's spam marketing. That's, I don't give a damn what you care. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Does that make any sense, Joel?
Thank you very much. Lots of sense, and put some detail to your advice, and convinces me I'm not yet a genius on this.
None of us are. This is one of those things that I think, unlike ISO 9000 or something, there is probably no upper limit. We can all get better at this stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Charles, it's Jim Cornelson. I'm wondering, you know, we basically are asking for permission to have the difficult discussion. You know, what are the issues underneath the RFP? What are the issues that are really driving some of the frustration you've got, et cetera? Right. Do you advise overtly asking for permission to have the tough discussion? Say, hey, listen, Charles, we've done this a lot and we found that it works best if we sort of dig down a little bit and find out what the tough issues are in your world.
Yes, I think that is a good thing, to ask permission to have the tough discussions. I mean, first of all, it's true, right? If you don't have those tough discussions, you're flying blind. And you're right, that often happens in an RFP situation. One way to increase the odds of them engaging with you is to say, listen, I'm not trying to seek competitive advantage by digging deeper. I wouldn't want any more access under this RFP than anyone else. So here's a suggestion. You should have this conversation with everybody, all of the people bidding on this thing, because you're going to get a better proposal from any of us if you engage in these what's behind it kinds of questions. I'd be happy to lead off. What do you think? I'm just offering this up to you. That's a way of demonstrating your own selflessness, and in a polite way, lecturing the client that unless they deal with these tough issues, they're not going to get much good results from engaging with sellers. That makes sense? Any other questions?
I'm going to throw up the last poll question when we still have everybody on the phone, which is just, what did you guys think of this webinar? Feel free to answer. But let's continue with the questions. I didn't mean to interrupt the flow if anybody has anything else.
I'll hang in here as long as people want it. You know,
Charlie, this is David New.
Hey, David.
I think, you know, many times when in sales, we get thrown off by an unexpected answer to a question from a client or an assertion. Your example was a good one. And I think, you know, I got this from you. I think and you just mentioned it, asking what's behind that is a great way to buy some time to, as well as dig into what the client is, what's the context behind the question that the client came up with, right? And it could be many times it's something that we're totally unexpected. It's totally unexpected by us, and we're not prepared for, and it gives us a chance to regather our equilibrium and come up with an intelligent, eventually, response to that question. So I think that was very good.
Yeah, that phrase, what's behind that? I learned that late in my consulting career. I wish I'd learned it earlier because it is really a good one. One other thought though, David, as you're going through that, you mentioned it as a way of buying time. to sort of recover, your temporary state of confusion there. Here's another thing: share that state of confusion. It's a way to create intimacy instantly by saying, "Wow, you you kind of threw me off on that one. Let me think out loud with you for a second. Help me understand more, but acknowledge the fact that you got thrown off a little bit and invite them in to collaboratively work with you. That does a lot of things. It acknowledges that the importance of emotions. It collaboratively invites them in. It says you're not afraid to share what you know, what you don't know. You're a big enough person to admit to not being God. It says a lot of good things. So when it's not, when you're pretty sure what you're doing, just the ability to say what's behind that is a real good one. But when you're even thrown for a loop, be honest about being thrown for a loop. Happens to all of us, right?
Good point.
Hey, Charlie, it's Chris Champagne. Nice to see you virtually.
Thank you. Likewise.
A question for you regarding a handshake guy salesperson, someone who's struggling mightily in a remote world. What quick suggestions would you have on how to bridge the gap in our virtual world?
Yeah.
Not being able to have a coffee, face-to-face dinner.
Right.
What advice would you have there?
Yeah, no, that's the question du jour for all of us, I think. I'll toss off a couple, and then I'm going to invite Noelle and Andrea in, who kind of my co-team here. First of all, the handshake is still important, not literally, because we can't do that even in person. We got to do the elbow thing or something. But what's behind the handshake is this little ceremony that we have of exchanging intimacies and reciprocating favors and so forth. So it raises the ante. Here's a couple of things you could do. Do more homework ahead of time before you interact with somebody. LinkedIn is fabulous. Just see what they've written, find a way to dig into who you're talking to. If you're on a phone call with somebody, or if you're on a Zoom call where they're not using the camera, make sure you have a photo of them yourself that you're looking at on your screen. So, because, we complexly, we in a rich way infer a lot from pictures. So have a picture of them. Another one, all that business about bring a risky gift, dial up hypotheses, issues, engage them in conversations about themselves. Chris, the handshake guy, right? A lot that goes with that are the sort of body language, internal dynamics. Well, when we're in this two-dimensional box, you can still use some of that. You have to probably use more modulation in your voice. And, you can come in close and you can back out. You can use thumbs up and thumbs down. I think it's incumbent on all of us. Yeah, right. It's incumbent on all of us to be better at Zoom visuals, basic mechanics. Forelighting is good, backlighting not good, or very little of it. Get your audio right, makes a huge difference. Let me stop there and ask Andrea Howe and Noelle Michaelenko if they want to toss in a couple. We've talked about this a lot.
I'll jump in and give Andrea a minute to find her mute button. Chris and I recently had a conversation over Zoom, and I think one of the really important things to remember to replace that handshake is the fact that we're not, in fact, dealing with a picture on a computer, that we're dealing with another human being. And so what I've heard a lot of people talk about in the last 3 months is the importance of just taking a minute and making that personal connection, where you can do that in an instant with eye contact, a handshake, like Charlie loves to say, pull the muscles of your mouth upward at the corners and let your eyes sparkle a little bit. It takes a little bit more time, but not much more time, to ask a couple of questions. So how are you? Where are you located? How are you experiencing what's happening? Just to give the person a chance to connect on that personal level. And when I say it doesn't take much more time, if you have a half-hour call with someone, spending 3 minutes up front, if that, just establishing that connection can really allow you to dive so much deeper that the other 27 minutes are much more valuable.
Yep.
Andrea, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just build on what you said, Noelle, because I think your points are great ones. Adding to that, I noticed, Noelle, you did a recording the other day that was on LinkedIn that I watched. It was so great because you made eye contact with your audience the entire time. And I know that that means for you to make eye contact with the audience, it meant you were staring at the camera and unable to directly see the person with whom you were engaging. So that's a funky phenomenon of our virtual world, is we can no longer actually make eye contact, but we can make it possible for others to see us in the eye. And that may sound like such a trivial and insignificant thing, and I actually think it's anything but. So training ourselves to be looking at the camera so they can see us, I think is on my list. I think also remembering, I don't know, I'm in various stages of COVID response, ranging from, okay, just another day, to holy cow, what's the crisis du jour? And I think not forgetting, especially in this setting, that what we are primarily is dealing with right now are human beings who are struggling every day in some way, shape, or form. And even if all we have is 30 minutes, if you allow 27 minutes of the conversation to be about life in general and to be connecting human to human, I'm going to suggest, Charlie, to your point about long-term behaviors versus short-term behaviors, that is a 27 minutes incredibly well spent toward establishing yourself as a safe haven for tough issues, not just somebody who's really smart about whatever it is that you're selling.
Yep. Great. Couldn't agree more. Thanks, guys. Anybody else? This is something we're all kind of working out together. I'm sure in any group this size, some of you got some cool suggestions too. So please add to the conversation that Chris raised here. How do we do this in the era of Zoom and COVID? Anyone?
Hi, my name is Sandy Gordon.
Hey, Sandy.
I'm from Oregon. So if you haven't noticed our news, we have crisis every night here.
Yes.
One I could add, and I actually just, for the first time yesterday, was allowed to meet with a client. I really appreciated both Noelle and Andrea's comments as well as your own, but I think that in this crisis right now, as we all lean on our families and we're all fearful for our families, it's maybe not politically correct, but I try to bring up children and grandchildren while I'm a grandma. So, that kind of goes right to the heart of, emotional stability right now is, how's your family? How's the kids coping with this? Kids, what's your situation? I used to be on our local school board for a long time, so I can talk to some of the educational challenges that teachers are facing as we go back to school. So as I don't mean to be trivial about this, but those are a lot of the emotions that are going on right now. And it's not so much about selling, but it's about connecting with them on a personal level in that first 3 to 5 minutes, as you say. And I have found that that's been a really good connector, and just listening to their viewpoints of it, whether or not there's no right or wrong,
Right.
Facing this in different challenges as with different lifestyles and families. But I just wanted to throw that out there because I find that's kind of the heart of things right now. And then that just really helps you connect on a personal level before you get to the focus of, why you were there. And that, I had a meeting yesterday that actually went an hour and a half because we spent the first 30 minutes talking about the issues on hand, and
Right.
we're struggling here in Oregon to deal with some of the other events, protesting riots and things like that. So I found it to be a really good first. It was timely for us and for the client I was meeting with, or prospect, and not that I won the sale because that wasn't the focus of the meeting, but we're meeting actually again today to talk further about what the next steps are to moving her account. So anyways, I just wanted to share that, because to Andrea, we are all struggling every day with what's the new crisis of the day. And it's like, wow, it's like, okay.
Yeah, let me just underscore that, Sandy. Thank you for raising that point. It's really profound and interesting. Grandchildren, like what a non threatening topic, and one that anybody can relate to, and the willingness to engage in a conversation. You're kind of proving the whole point, Sandy, and you agree with this too, I'm sure, that the more you can make this personal, long-term, focused on the other person and not focused, as you said, on winning the sale, paradoxically, the more likely you are to get the sale. But that can't be the objective. The objective has to be to show up fully human and genuinely interested in other people's grandchildren, what it's like to be in Portland, or whatever, pick your thing. If we interact with people as humans, focused on them, then the sale is a byproduct. It's secondary. It comes out the other end, oh yeah, there's that too. So I love the example. I think it just proves the paradox of this. If we stop trying to focus on getting the sale, focus on the person and their situation, hey, guess what? Among other things, you get more sales.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to try and follow Sandy? That's a good one. All right, well, I think we're at about the hour. Like I said, I'm happy to hang out here if anybody wants to, but otherwise, do we have a closing slide, Jason, I need to put up?
Yeah, the resources, I think if you want to throw it up,
yeah,
it's the last
let me
slide.
do that there. Yeah, you can look at, we got blogs, we got ebooks, we got videos, we got another webinar coming up, not this particular one. We've got, you can go in and take your own TQ quiz. We've been doing this for going on 20 years.
I'm going to jump in. We actually have a resource page, trustedadvisor.com/crisis, with a lot of consolidated resources on how to deal with exactly what we've just been talking about: remote, communication, just the ups and downs of emotions and the economy and all that stuff too. I'll share that. We'll share that afterwards in the email. Follow me.
Okay. Good. Well, thanks everybody. Your time is up. Like I said, I'll hang around for anybody interested, but thank you all for coming today. Have a great day and stay safe.